Welcome to Drew Island. Population, Drew. A lonely, poorly educated, and ill-healthed little fella. Completely broke and bored out of his mind. At this rate, Drew will be dead within days. Oh, don't look at me like that, mate. I'm not going to let that happen to you. We'll get you an education, we'll find you a fancy job, we'll get you fit and healthy, and even find a bit of love. Because in your lifetime, you're going to see this tiny little one-house island transform into a big bustling city. And I call this the City in a Lifetime Challenge. A big shout out to Paradox Interactive for sponsoring today's video. The rules are simple. As long as Drew is alive and breathing that fresh island air, then we can continue building the city. But as soon as that's not the case, we have to stop. Game over. I'm going to be aiming for the small city milestone. This is of course when we start to unlock some of the high density office blocks, and the ones that I am truly after are these guys. The new US East Coast region pack does add a whole bunch of high density buildings to cities, and I reckon if I can get Drew Island to warrant buildings of this size, then that is a win in my books. But at the end of it all, I do want this to look and feel like a big city with all big city stuff, developed organically, somewhat realistic, and with minimal mods. The true challenge, keeping Drew alive and trying to get this place established before the little fella carks it. So without further ado, let's see how he's going. Not great. A couple of basic services just to get us going, and already Drew's life has improved quite a lot. However, he's going to need more than power and water to live a meaningful life. He's going to need some friends. So I zoned out a little bit of residential, giving Drew some neighbors to hang out with. I also zoned out a little bit of commercial, checking out some of the new buildings as part of the new US East Coast pack. And I tell you what, these new commercial wall-to-wall buildings are exactly what we needed. Within the island context though, maybe a little bit odd. But regardless, Drew Island was come together pretty nicely. Now rocking a population of 1. Still just Drew. So... oh, that's lucky. Once I unlocked the tiny village milestone, I bought the tiles bridging the gap between the two islands. And speaking of bridging the gap, that is exactly what I plan to do. Rather than filling in the space between the two islands and making them just the one island, which would be the smarter option, that extra bridge makes it feel just that little bit more disconnected from the outside world. Plus, a little bit more interesting. I gave Drew Island a little bit of extra space to grow. We're only 3 minutes in and already so much of Drew Island has changed, though I am trying to keep a little bit of the essence of the island still intact, with the beaches remaining as well as some of the coastline. And as far as the roads, we've already got 2, Drew Lane 1 and Drew Lane 2. These 2 roads are going to be the foundation of the city. As we continue to grow, we'll always remember where we started from. There are just some non-negotiables that must remain throughout the entire process. I continued the road layout, trying to figure out where on earth this city is going to go. It is especially tricky because I usually have the topography of the land to guide my road layout. And this is going to get big, and I don't want it to just be flat. I wanted to connect the two islands with a road that looked and felt a little bit old. Eventually, this will be the old road, and we'll have to build something fancier and much bigger to handle all that traffic. But for now, we've just got this little old guy, and I wanted to detail him up by placing down a couple of pillars just to give a bit more of an old vibe. When it comes to zoning, I'm keeping it pretty simple. This place is going to change quite a lot over the next little while, so there's no point getting too attached to how things are looking. I'm using a lot of the wall-to-wall commercial buildings for the center, and then we've also got some single-family housing making up the bulk of the residential. And in true city builder fashion, I've dedicated an entire island for our industry. But my favorite part, seeing the new row houses. These really do capture the US East Coast vibe, but I reckon are pretty versatile. You could probably use a lot of these assets within a lot of cities from around the world. But you know what? Drew doesn't really care about that. He's more interested in all the people moving onto his island. And in fact, he's even scored himself a little job. Well done, mate. At Spasm. Okay. Great. Good on you, Drew. You're doing great. And you know what? The whole island's doing great. With nearly 500 residents already moved in, it was time to start making some upgrades. I replaced that noisy old windmill with a big boy coal power plant. And by the time I connected them up to the rest of the city, just like that, we'd hit our next milestone. Perhaps this challenge was going to be easier than I thought. Nope. At the start of a new day, it was time to add some basic services. A medical clinic to keep people alive, and a school to keep people educated. With these services being added, our budget was starting to take a hit, and we weren't exactly making any money this stage anyway, so I decided to hit the budget and try to make some adjustments where we could. But when it comes down to it, we really just need more taxpayers. This was a good excuse to then zone out a little bit more residential, but as you can see, we're actually running out of space pretty quickly. Thankfully, we did have a bit of demand for some medium density. Another great excuse to play around with some of the new assets. I focused my attention on the center of town to build up a little bit of density. I also wanted to get into a little bit of detail work, just using a couple of mods just so I can really tailor make some of these blocks, paired with some row houses and some different buildings from other region packs. This whole area is starting to turn out pretty nice, and with that we hit the next milestone, and with it some extra responsibilities. More services were added, tiles were purchased, Drew Island expanded, and so did the roads, and so did the zoning. We were developing pretty well. However, the delicate balancing act of budget and expanding had begun. Taxing here, cutting corners there. Ooh, it's a fine line, and I was in a bit of a hurry. Things needed to be good early. Drew could cark it at any moment. So I made the first of many, many silly decisions. I took out a big fat loan. Rather than going slow, letting things develop, waiting for people to move in, waiting to hit milestones, I was rushing. I needed to know that Drew was living his best life, that he was happy, that he was healthy, that he was educated. Also, how old is he even? It just says adult. He could turn into a senior at any given moment. The world is a dangerous place, and Drew wasn't exactly looking after himself. A job at chemical or Drew, that sounds dangerous. Can you not be around chemicals, please? Blah, these roads. Fires, I don't want them either. Alright, that's it. More loans, more expanding, we need to get this place more established. I expanded Drew Island to the north, giving us a little bit of extra space to develop on, but then I didn't want it to be too easy, and I also wanted it to be a little bit different up this way, so it is a bit more hilly. With the added distance away from our starting square, it does feel like we can add a little bit more density up here and call it our second city. And I'm going to call it North Drew Island. And of course, I could really hit those milestones if I just made the entire island high density. However, I like the idea of this being a super condensed real life place that has neighborhoods and low density and medium density and a meaty high density city center, all condensed onto a couple of islands. Yes, still very unrealistic, but kind of fun. With the added elevation, I figured that this would be a pretty good spot for some windmills. Thankfully, Drew isn't a bird, so his safety shouldn't be affected. And with the expansion of Drew Island now complete, it was time to give the same treatment to Smog Island. That's what I'm going to call it. Smog Island, for reasons that'll be more obvious in just a moment. But first, we needed a new highway. We needed something pretty fancy. Our old bridge, too small, too few lanes. The commute, too brutal. But not this one. Tall, wide, modern, sleek. Just look at this custom bridge. Oh baby, this is the good stuff. And the citizens, they loved it. Oh, thank you so much, Mayor $2. Now we can get to Smog Island even faster. I know. I'm pretty proud of it too. But just don't look at this part. In fact, draw your attention to this wonderful little area of mixed zoning. Similar to other blocks that I've detailed, I just wanted to place these buildings down just so I can get a good idea of how some of these blocks can actually look, and again, paired with some other assets from some other region packs and even some vanilla ones, this does turn out pretty nice. I continue to go block by block, adding little bits of detail here and there, and just getting a good feel of how I can detail up the city. However, the looming threat of complete financial ruin is becoming a real buzzkill. So much so that pretty much no matter what I do, no matter what I tinker with, I pretty much am stuck with the same situation, always losing money. It's not all bad though. Drew does finally get an education at primary school as an adult. Fine. And the city is slowly starting to come together. However, if we don't fix our money problems, this all could fall apart very quickly. A new day, same problems. I tinker with a budget, trying to cut corners and squeeze the pennies out of the taxpayers. There's not much I can do here, but fortunately, zoning is free. With industry being our only demand, I figured that this would be a good chance to make a little bit of money. I get into some specialized industry, zoning out as much as I can in the available space that I have. Once they've all developed up and start making a bit of money, I run out of electricity. Increase the funding, run out of power. Increase the funding, run out of power. Oh. Well, I'm stumped. At this point, I was a little bit nervous about this challenge. With seemingly no way out of this financial situation and with Drew just taking up so many dangerous jobs, come on mate. I was either going to stay completely bankrupt or Drew was going to end the challenge faster than I'd hoped. I hit the next milestone and with it, a little money bonus. I was also able to take out a bit more of a loan, and with that extra cash, I tried something a bit risky. I replaced our wind farm with another coal power plant and that was enough to get us pretty close to the green. I adjusted our tax ever so slightly and bam, we were back. It was going to take some time to get into the green, so I needed to do some things that didn't cost any money, like detailing. It was an absolute crawl, and we're only making peanuts, but we were making nonetheless. And the city was looking a little bit more detailed, however, a bit more worse for wear. Despite our wonderful highway, the city was very badly connected, and this was affecting death care and rubbish. So I did some work on the highway, connecting up North Drew Island to South Drew Island and our bridge. And really, just a couple of very simple connections down here. Don't think too much about this. This is just a little connection. And speaking of which, with the added tip to Smog Island, I felt like we needed another bridge connecting up both islands. Feeling a little bit inspired by Imperata and thinking maybe I'll do one of those lift bridges. However, this is a bit of a botched job and not very much love has gone into this, and I think the results definitely show. With a very slow trickle of money, I decided to keep on expanding, getting into some of the suburbs and expanding out some of the road network. It was slow with the amount of money that I had, but we were getting there. And then it started to snow. It was pretty nice, I have to admit. Watching the two islands become blanketed in snow, very lovely. Financially though, not great. We took a hit, and we're back to losing money. I decided to spend this time just doing some really cheap stuff. Nothing too crazy, nothing breaking the budget, just detailing, just a little bit of TLC. And by the time winter was done, we hit the next milestone and with it, another little bonus. But I figured, for as long as we're gonna have this massive debt, we're always gonna be paying interest. So I decided to spend the next couple of months just paying it off, but eventually, we were finally debt free. And with that, I felt like celebrating by doing some major work on our shorefront, the area that we began it all. This needed to be something special, something that paid tribute to the foundation of the city. I felt like a nice little boardwalk would be nice with some shops. We've also got a bit of a pier here that is jutting out into the ocean and is definitely giving a little bit of Coney Island vibes. And this boardwalk is actually Drew Lane. The very first lane, the very first street that we had on the island is now this. And I feel like that is a nice little nod to where we started from. And once all this area was complete, I was feeling pretty happy with how it was all starting to turn out. However, I was distracted. I was distracted with the budget. I was distracted detailing. I should have been paying more attention to Drew. He was sad and unwell, and I was concerned. However, I didn't need to be. Turns out the little fella is lovesick. Moving in with Maxine Riley. What a #happy #day. Oh, Drew, to think I was worried about you. You're gonna be just fine. And I'm sure Maxine is a senior. Senior? Drew, for crying out loud. Alright, whatever. You do you. I've got a city to build. I got back to work expanding. We were making some pretty good progress in terms of the milestones, and I reckon if I just left the simulation running for a good amount of time, we would make a pretty decent amount of money and hit that small city milestone in a couple of hours. However, I wasn't too sure if Drew was going to stick around for long enough. And, probably more importantly, at this stage, there was still so much more left to do. There were some personal milestones for me. There were some things that I wanted to see within Drew Island, and even if I hit that small city milestone with Drew still alive and the island looking as it does at the moment, I don't think I could justify zoning out such high density with the island lacking some very important pieces of infrastructure. So after fleshing out a couple of empty areas within Drew Island and extending out our highway, which is now slightly better connected around the island, it was time to extend Drew Island out towards the east. This is going to be a major development, a lot of it suburbia, we needed a whole bunch of it, but then we also have a dedicated island that is going to be rather expensive, probably can't really justify just yet, we'll get back to it. But some big pieces of infrastructure are definitely needed for that one particular spot, so I felt like I needed a pretty substantial bridge that could handle a pretty good amount of traffic. This is connected up to Drew Lane, which is now turned into a 3-lane, one-way street. I feel like it is handling traffic okay, just okay, but it looked cool, and that's the most important thing in my books. But for the rest of South Drew Island, not so much so. It needed a major overhaul. So it took some time going block by block, just thinking about how they're going to be looking and adding in some important pieces of infrastructure, buildings, and some things that I feel like a real city needs. A little bit of surface parking, some mixed zoning, some low commercial, and also a little bit of industry. Not to mention some wharves. We definitely needed some wharves. Pretty much any city that is built around water, which is pretty much all of them, will have some sort of old wharf infrastructure that was built when the city was dedicated to industry going in and out of these wharves, and a lot of the time these are being dedicated now to parkland, or in this case, a bit more parking. And some commercial. This looks pretty nice down here, doesn't it? I want to build a bit of a mix down here. We got a bit of parking, we got a bit of commercial, and I'm also going to stick a bit of industry as well, just to show, yeah, back in the day, maybe even still today, still got a bit of industry. All this is connected to the parkland out the front of the very first house within Drew Island, so it's kind of nice that all this is kind of dedicated to a nice little parkland. Yes, at one point it was industry, but we'll ignore that. I could honestly detail for days, but once again, the city was grinding to a halt. The streets clogged with traffic and causing all sorts of issues for our service vehicles, in particular, death care and garbage. This was urgent. This was affecting Drew right now, so it was time to expand out our highway. And the thing is, this was always the plan, was to extend out our highway in this direction, and maybe you probably saw this coming because those highways were abruptly ended at some pretty weird spots. We're going to need another island dedicated to industry and an outside connection, and with it, a big long bridge to support all that traffic. This is going to be a fairly important bridge, not just in function, but I also wanted it to feel and look fairly detailed. But of course, the main purpose is the function. We did need this thing to work pretty well, and it did need to have a pretty good connection to the rest of the highway. So I spent some time connecting up the rest of the highway so that it was a far better connection between our two outside connections. Some of these are purely just functional connections. You know, don't look too much at them. They're just purely there because I needed them. Other connections, like around South Drew Island, around the city, I kind of wanted this to be a little bit more interesting and a little bit more just a tangle of highway and ramps and roads. I always like these areas, always find them super interesting, and I always like building them within my cities. You might be asking the question, doesn't this just make your city look ugly? With that connection done and dusted, it was time to figure out what this island was going to be all about. And for that, I had a pretty good idea what this island was going to be all about. Garbage. Garbage Island. Hooray! But $2. Why have such a grand bridge going towards what is just an island dedicated to rubbish? Okay, that is enough questions for you. Because it doesn't matter. We were expanding. We were deep in development. We were detailing. We were making money. Kicking goals, meeting milestones. It was all good stuff. We were completely on track, but distracted. We lost Maxine. I dedicated a spot in the historical graveyard for her and wondered whether Drew would be joining her shortly. Nope, actually he's just chirping about a new job. Well, with Drew getting back to business, so will I. I continue expanding the suburbs, getting further north and trying to figure out what on earth this is going to look like. This could be potentially the furthest north we get. I don't know if we're going to go too much further. I'm using some of the main roads just to get a good idea of where some of the neighborhoods can sit, and then from them I can snake out some of the streets to form some neighborhoods and figure out how this place was potentially developed maybe organically or in a way that feels a bit more realistic. I do need to come back and figure out a little bit more detail work in this area, but as I am working on it, I realized that we have actually hit the small city milestone. We've now unlocked some of the tall office blocks and I am really keen to see them within Drew Island. However, as you can see, we don't have any demand for it, and I do also feel like we need a little bit more within the city before we can truly justify it. So I push on with the expansion. We have a lot more demand for single family housing. I did need a little bit more space around Garbage Island, so the expansion of Garbage Island began. This will always remain a fairly industrial island, and I will continue to flesh out and add some garbage management on Garbage Island. I've also left a little bit of space for more industrial development, but for now, we're just going to leave it at pretty much this. With all that development, it was time to check back in with Drew. Oh no. Oh no. I didn't plan for this. Drew was homeless, and if he didn't find a home soon, he'd leave the city. My big residential expansion had come too late. The housing crisis was in full force now. There wasn't much stopping it. Residents were just not moving in fast enough. And who can blame them? One road in, not good enough. We needed alternatives. I started with a seaport. This would at least free up a bit of the cargo coming in and out of the city. At the moment, they are just going via this road, and that was just not going to cut it anymore. But I knew that I was going to have to do a lot better than this. As you probably know, I already planned for it. This is, of course, something that every big city needs, an airport. I'd planned for it, and I was excited to build it. I was excited that I finally had enough money for it, and I knew exactly where I was going to go. This was going to be one of the last big pieces of infrastructure that was going to really help me justify all that density that I was about to zone out. This was a bit of a personal milestone, but as it turns out, we actually needed it. I kept it pretty simple down here, just a little one-way road leading in, and then the other side leading out, and of course, you can't forget about that little loop just in case you missed your stop. With a little bit of parking down here, and of course a hotel, also placed down a little bit of office blocks, and with that, the basic infrastructure down here was pretty much complete. But of course, what's the fun in building an airport if we also don't build some public transport? And yes, it is pretty shameful to only just be getting to public transport now, but it's been a bit of a rush, let's be honest. I decided to go for a subway. This would get traffic off the streets, but then also, at this very moment, train infrastructure would probably be too large. With Anarchy enabled, I was able to fit the depot in that awkward spot of the airport, which was pretty cool. And with that, it was time to start working on the network. For me, it's all about watching these trains move. I like the way they navigate your city, the way they have to weave around buildings and work their way around the natural landscape, and use pre-existing infrastructure that's already there, that's already carving their way throughout the city. Yes, it might pop down into the undergrounds at some stage, however, that's part of the fun. Also, thinking about where it goes throughout the city is also part of the fun. It'd be very useful to go to every neighborhood, to go to every island. However, I'm only going to the densest places. This is, of course, one of the most fun parts of building a city in City Skylines. Figuring out the network and then watching people use it is just so lovely. I love it, the people love it, and then also, Office loves it. Just look at all that demand. The stage was set for the final phase of Drew Island. However, he was done. Our main man, Drew himself, was leaving the city. Homeless, unemployed, and fed up. Drew Island was not where I wanted it to be. I was hoping to get further in this challenge. I was hoping to have high density. I was hoping to have more detail. But more importantly, I wanted more for Drew. I had failed him. Or had I? You see, Drew was in fact leaving with someone. Rose. Rose and their pet dog Lily. The three of them off to start a brand new adventure and a brand new life in the city of Albany. And you know, this might just be the perfect ending to this whole story. Rather than watching him grow old and dying in the very home that he started off in, Drew is off to a brand new city to start a brand new life. Would I have liked to see Drew Island more developed before he left? Absolutely. But you know what? He hasn't technically left just yet. crew is now officially off the island. And this challenge is now complete. And I reckon the city is, I wouldn't say complete. What do you reckon? I am very tempted because there is, of course, still a lot more left to do and a lot more left to expand. And I've still got a lot of ideas that I would like to continue and even detail and think about, especially with these 2 new region packs. There is just a lot of potential. So please let me know. I am very keen. Big shout outs to Paradox Interactive for sponsoring today's video, and a massive shout outs to my YouTube members and patrons for making videos like this possible. M. Mark, Ashley Pringle, Cappy3, Ralph, Blake Martin, Brace Lava, Ryan Hovastad, Sam Wybro, James Paul Velasco, Us, and Orho Official. Cheers guys, catch you all on the next one. See ya.